When we think of how Islam came to India, most people imagine swords, conquests, and invading armies. We think of kings and sultans, of battles and empires, but that is only one part of a much larger story, a story that is softer, slower, and far more human. The real journey of Islam in India was not only written in war chronicles, but in markets, ports, poetry, and the silent prayers of wandering saints. Long before the armies of the Ghaznavids or the Delhi sultans arrived, Arab ships were already sailing along India's western coast. Merchants from Yemen, Oman, and the Persian Gulf had known the route to India for centuries, even before Islam was born. They came for spices, textiles, ivory, and gems. And when Islam emerged in the 7th century, these same merchants carried with them not just goods, but a new faith, a new way of life, and a message that spoke of unity, equality, and devotion to one God. The Arabian Sea became one of the great highways of faith. By the time the Prophet Muhammad had passed away, Arab traders were already visiting the ports of Gujarat, Kerala, and Sri Lanka. The first mosque in India, the Cheraman Juma Masjid in Kerala, is said to have been built around the early 7th or 8th century. Local legends tell that Cheraman Perumal, a Hindu king of Kerala, saw a vision of the moon splitting, a miracle associated with the prophet. Inspired, he sent envoys to Arabia and, according to tradition, even accepted Islam. Whether legend or history, the story reflects something deeper, the connection between trade, curiosity, and faith that marked the beginnings of Islam in India. Trade was not just about buying and selling. It was about relationships, trust built over time, promises kept, and friendships formed across languages and religions. Muslim traders were known for their honesty, and their success in business often made people curious about their beliefs. When a merchant prayed 5 times a day, refused to cheat, or shared his meal with strangers, it made an impression. Slowly, quietly, these interactions began to sow the seeds of Islam in the coastal communities of India. As centuries passed, the Indian Ocean world became a vast network, from the ports of Basra and Muscat to those of Cambay, Calicut, and Chittagong. Ships carried not only goods, but also ideas. Alongside trade came travelers, scholars, and mystics, people searching not for profit, but for truth. And it was through them that Islam took root deeply, not as a foreign religion imposed from outside, but as a living faith adapted to Indian soil. By the 10th and 11th centuries, the picture of Islam in India was already changing. In the northwest, in Sindh and Multan, Islam had been established through earlier conquests. But elsewhere, along the coasts of Gujarat, Konkan, and Malabar, it was spreading through human connection. Communities of Arab and Persian traders married local women, creating new families and cultures. Their children grew up speaking local languages but following Islamic practices. The result was a uniquely Indian expression of Islam, one that combined faith with local traditions, devotion with diversity. Then came another wave, not of merchants this time, but of mystics. They were called Sufis, men of peace, humility, and spiritual depth. They did not come to rule or to convert by force. They came to live among people, to guide hearts rather than armies. The Sufis believed that love was the truest path to God, love for the Creator and love for all creation. When Sufism reached India, it found a land that already understood the language of the soul. Hindu and Buddhist traditions in India had long emphasized meditation, detachment, and union with the divine. The Sufis found kindred spirits in Indian mystics. Instead of rejecting local culture, they embraced it. They wore simple clothes, ate the food of the poor, and spoke the languages of the people. Through music, poetry, and compassion, they created a spiritual bridge between Islam and India. In the 12th and 13th centuries, as the Delhi Sultanate rose to power, the Sufi orders spread across the subcontinent. Among the earliest and most influential were the Chishtis, Suhrawardis, Qadiris, and Naqshbandis. Each order had its own style and focus, but they shared one common message, that God is found not through rituals or power, but through love, humility, and service. The Chishti order, founded by Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti in Ajmer, became one of the most beloved. Khwaja Moinuddin came from Central Asia, but when he arrived in India, he devoted his life to helping the poor and spreading compassion. He taught that one's door should always be open to Hindus, to Muslims, to anyone who sought food or comfort. In his hospice or khanqa, people from every background gathered. The sound of prayer mingled with the sound of songs, qawwalis that celebrated divine love. To this day, his shrine in Ajmer attracts millions of people, Muslims and non-Muslims alike. The Suhrawardis, centered in Multan and later Uch Sharif, were more structured and scholarly. Figures like Bahauddin Zakaria combined spiritual leadership with learning. Their teachings influenced rulers and scholars alike, helping shape Islamic institutions in early India. In their khanqas, one could find students studying the Quran beside poets, composing verses of longing and divine beauty. In Bengal, the story unfolded differently. When Muslim governors and traders reached Bengal in the 13th century, they found a land rich with culture and deeply rooted in folk traditions. Here too, Sufis became the face of Islam. Men like Jalaluddin Tabrizi, Shah Jalal of Sylhet, and Khan Jahan Ali in the south. They did not preach through power. They built mosques and wells, cleared forests, helped farmers, and treated the sick. Through their deeds, not their words, people came to see Islam as a faith of compassion and community. In the Deccan, Sufi saints like Khwaja Banda Nawaz Gesudaras in Gulbarga and Haji Malang near Mumbai created similar centers of spiritual life. Their teachings often blended Persian mysticism with local expressions, using regional languages, songs, and metaphors that ordinary people could understand. It was through this cultural translation that Islam became part of the Indian soul. The Sufis also gave India some of its greatest poetry. Their verses spoke of love, longing, and surrender, ideas that touched hearts across religious lines. Baba Farid in Punjab, for example, wrote poetry in early Punjabi that later inspired Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism. Amir Khusrau, the beloved disciple of Nizamuddin Auliya, wrote in Persian and Hindavi, blending cultures with his words. Through music, he gave birth to qawwali and influenced the very sound of Indian spirituality. And while the Sufis shaped hearts, the traders continued to shape societies. Along India's coasts, Muslim communities flourished. In Gujarat's port of Cambay, in Calicut on the Malabar coast, in Nagapattinam on the Coromandel, and in Bengal's delta. These were cosmopolitan places where Arabs, Persians, Africans, Chinese, and Indians lived side by side. Mosques stood near temples and churches. Ships from Aden and Basra anchored beside vessels from Ceylon and Malacca. It was a world connected not by empire, but by exchange. Through these networks, Indian Muslims became part of a larger oceanic civilization. Stretching from East Africa to Indonesia, the faith they practiced was flexible and open-minded, shaped by travel and diversity. The merchants prayed before they set sail, gave charity to sailors, and built mosques wherever they settled. Some became patrons of learning and art, while others supported Sufi shrines. In this way, commerce and spirituality worked together, one sustaining bodies, the other nurturing souls. Over time, the presence of Islam in India grew not just in numbers, but in depth. It entered the language, the art, and the rhythm of life. Persian became the language of administration and poetry, but it mingled with local tongues to give birth to Urdu, a language born of contact and coexistence. The food, music, and architecture of medieval India began to reflect Islamic aesthetics. The domes and arches of mosques blended with Hindu artistry, creating something uniquely Indian. And through all these changes, the Sufis remained at the center. They did not compete with kings, but kings often sought their blessings. When Delhi's rulers built mosques or palaces, they also built shrines for the saints who gave their reigns moral legitimacy. The people trusted the saints more than the rulers, for the saints lived simply, spoke softly, and served humanity without expectation. Their graves became places of hope. Even today, the dargahs of Ajmer, Delhi, Lahore, and Gulbarga are visited by millions, regardless of religion. But why did Sufism succeed where politics failed? The answer lies in its message. The Sufis did not divide people into believers and non-believers. They spoke of the heart, of a God who was beyond name or form, yet close to every soul. They used metaphors that resonated deeply with Indians: the beloved and the lover, the union of soul and spirit, the dance of devotion. This language transcended barriers. It made faith feel personal, not political. And just as the Sufis spread Islam through love, trade continued to spread it through trust. Indian merchants who embraced Islam traveled to Southeast Asia, to Java, Sumatra, and the Malay Peninsula, carrying their faith along. Thus, the story of Islam in India is also the story of Islam beyond India. It was from India's coasts that Islam reached the islands of Indonesia, carried not by conquerors, but by sailors and traders whose honesty became their sermon. However, this story was not without tension. There were times when religious and political forces clashed, when Sufis faced suspicion from orthodox scholars or rulers. Some Sufis withdrew into solitude. Others continued to work quietly among the poor. Despite challenges, their message endured: that love of God cannot exist without love for humanity. In the long centuries between the 8th and 16th, Islam in India grew like a tree, its roots deep in trade and spirituality, its branches spreading through art, language, and culture. It touched every part of life, from the coastal villages of Kerala to the riverbanks of Bengal, from the deserts of Sindh to the hills of Kashmir. And though it came from outside, it became one with the land. By the time the Mughal Empire rose, Islam in India was no longer foreign. It had been Indianized, shaped by the soil, by the people, by centuries of coexistence. Mughal emperors like Akbar would later draw from the Sufi idea of tolerance, promoting dialogue among religions. The very spirit of India's pluralism owes much to that fusion that began with the traders and the saints. Today, when we visit the old ports of India, we can still find traces of that early world: ancient mosques facing the sea, tombs of forgotten sailors, and shrines glowing with lamps lit by people of every faith. The same light that once guided ships across oceans now guides hearts across generations. If we listen carefully to the qawwalis at a Sufi shrine or to the calls of traders in a coastal bazaar, we can still feel the rhythm of that history, the pulse of exchange, generosity, and devotion that carried Islam across India. It was never only a religion of kings and scholars. It was a faith lived by sailors, poets, and mystics, by ordinary people who found extraordinary meaning in the journey of the soul. So, when we ask, how did Islam spread through India? The answer is not found in the clash of armies, but in the quiet persistence of human connection. It spread through trust built on trade, through kindness shown by strangers, through songs that spoke to the heart more than sermons ever could. And perhaps that is why it lasted, because it was rooted not in conquest, but in compassion. It was a faith that arrived not as a storm, but as a breeze, soft, constant, and transformative. It taught that the marketplace and the mosque, the sea and the shrine, the trader and the saint, all were parts of the same divine design. And now, centuries later, we must ask ourselves, what can we learn from that journey? Can faith still travel through friendship as it once did on the waves of the Arabian Sea? Can spirituality still unite us in a world divided by belief? Can we, like those early merchants and Sufis, see beyond the boundaries of religion and recognize the shared longing that lies in every human heart? Because maybe the true story of Islam in India is not about how it spread, but about what it revealed. The timeless truth that love, when carried sincerely, crosses every border, and that the soul, when seeking God, always finds common ground.